The worst year of your life might be the first one you're actually awake for. That sounds like something stitched onto a throw pillow, but there's a mechanical reason why people who start meditating, questioning their beliefs, or peeling back their own psychology tend to watch their external lives fall apart shortly after. By the end of this, you'll understand the specific sequence that connects inner clarity to outer chaos. And if you've recently started doing the work and everything around you is crumbling, this might explain why. Picture a building with a cracked foundation. For years, the crack has been there, but the walls are plastered over, the furniture arranged to cover the uneven floors, the doors shaved down to fit frames that shifted years ago. Everything works. Badly, but it works. Now picture someone walking in with a level and a flashlight. The cracks were always there. The flashlight just made them visible. That's the mechanism. Awareness acts like a diagnostic scan on a life that was held together by compensations you stopped noticing. You got promoted, so you stopped questioning whether you liked the career. The relationship filled a specific loneliness, so you stopped asking if it was actually good. The social circle validated a version of you that felt safe, so you stopped checking whether that version was honest. Awakening, whatever form it takes, hands you the flashlight. And the first thing you illuminate is how much of your life was built around avoiding a feeling rather than pursuing a want. This is where the collapse begins, because you can unknow a fact, but you can't unsee a pattern. Once you recognize that your job exists to soothe an anxiety your father installed in you at age 12, you can't sit in that cubicle the same way on Monday morning. The spreadsheet looks different. The commute feels different. Your body starts registering what your mind spent years suppressing. That dull ache in your chest during the morning meeting had a message. You were just too well adapted to read it. So why does the external structure actually break? Why doesn't awareness just coexist with the old life? Because tolerance has a threshold, and awareness lowers it. Think of it like pain medication wearing off mid-surgery. The surgery was always happening. You were just numb enough to lie still. When the numbness fades, you move, and movement on the operating table creates problems. The first thing that usually goes is relationships. Specifically, the ones built on an unspoken contract. I'll be this version of myself, and you'll be that version of yourself, and neither of us will change. Awakening violates that contract. You start saying things you mean. You stop laughing at jokes that aren't funny. You ask questions that make Thanksgiving dinner go quiet. The people around you don't experience your growth as growth. They experience it as betrayal. You change the terms. And the ones who resist your change the hardest are often the ones who benefited most from your sleep. Careers collapse next, usually on a delay. You can white-knuckle a job you've outgrown for about 6 to 18 months after the awareness hits. Then something snaps. A meeting where you hear yourself performing enthusiasm and the dissonance becomes physically unbearable. A Sunday night where the dread isn't just emotional, it sits in your stomach like a stone. The resignation letter writes itself in your head during the shower. You just haven't typed it yet. Here's the part most spiritual frameworks skip entirely. The collapse has a specific emotional signature, and it mimics depression almost perfectly. Withdrawal from social life. Loss of interest in things that used to excite you. Fatigue. A sense that nothing matters. Clinically, this looks like a breakdown. Structurally, it's a renovation. The difference matters because how you interpret the collapse determines whether you move through it or get stuck in it. People who frame the collapse as punishment tend to retreat back into the old structure. They take the job back, they apologize for changing, they shove the furniture over the cracks again, and it works for a while. But the flashlight is still on. You can close your eyes, but you can't uninstall the bulb. People who frame the collapse as information tend to move through it faster. They grieve what's falling apart. And grieving is critical here, because you're losing a self, and that deserves the same weight as any other loss. But they treat each piece that breaks off as data about what was load-bearing and what was decorative. The loneliness is the part nobody warns you about. Somewhere in the middle of the collapse, you'll find yourself in a gap. The old life doesn't fit. The new one hasn't formed yet. You're standing in a doorway, and on both sides there's fog. This gap can last weeks. It can last years. The temptation to grab anything, a new relationship, a new ideology, a new identity, just to fill the vacuum is enormous. And grabbing too early is how people swap one cage for another. They leave a corporate job, To join a commune, they leave a controlling partner and immediately attach to a guru. The structure changed, the dependency didn't. The gap is where the actual work happens, and the work is learning to tolerate the absence of a story about yourself. Most people have never spent a single day without a narrative identity running in the background. I'm a teacher. I'm the responsible one. I'm spiritual now. Strip all of those away, and what's left is a silence most people find unbearable. Sitting in that silence without filling it is the thing that separates transformation from substitution. A therapist once described this phase to me as the fertile void. The emptiness isn't empty. It's the space where something new can root. But only if you stop paving it over with premature certainty. So what actually rebuilds? And what determines whether the new structure holds? The rebuilding follows a pattern that researchers in post-traumatic growth have documented across thousands of cases. The people who come through a life collapse with a more durable sense of self tend to share a few traits. They maintained at least one relationship where they could be honest about the confusion. They had some form of physical practice, walking, lifting, swimming, that kept them anchored in their body while their mind was in freefall, and they resisted the urge to make the collapse into a story too quickly. They sat with, "I don't know what's happening," longer than felt comfortable. The rebuilt life tends to be smaller, fewer friends, but the ones who remain know the real version. A career that pays less but costs less internally. A daily rhythm that wouldn't look impressive on social media, but feels like exhaling after years of holding your breath. Critics of the spiritual awakening framework, and they make a fair point, argue that what people call awakening is sometimes just destabilization dressed in sacred language. Someone has a panic attack during a meditation retreat and calls it Kundalini rising. Someone dissociates from their life and calls it ego death. The criticism has teeth. Using spiritual vocabulary to avoid psychological accountability is real, and it's common. But the pattern of awareness followed by collapse appears across so many cultures, centuries, and psychological frameworks that reducing it to pathology misses something. The mystics described it. The existentialists described it now, with brain scans instead of poetry. The vocabulary changes, the sequence stays the same. You see something you can't unsee. The structures built on blindness start to fail. There's a period of disorientation that feels like dying. And then, if you don't retreat and you don't grab, something assembles itself from the pieces, something that fits. The collapse was never the opposite of the awakening. It was the cost of admission. Every room you've ever entered required leaving the previous one. But we don't usually think about how thoroughly we have to close that door. How many of our possessions won't fit through the new frame? How many people won't follow us into the hallway? You started this thinking the collapse was the problem, that the spiritual work was supposed to prevent the falling apart, that doing it right would mean a smooth transition from unconscious to conscious, from asleep to awake, with your marriage or your career and your friend group intact. That version of awakening exists in book blurbs and weekend workshop brochures. The version that happens in kitchens at 2 a.m, staring at a lease you can't afford for an apartment that belongs to someone you used to be. That version comes with a demolition permit. The question was never whether things would fall apart. The question is whether you'll let them fall far enough to see what's underneath the foundation you inherited, because under the cracks, under the plaster, under the furniture you arranged around damage you were told to ignore, there might be bedrock, or there might be more emptiness. Either way, you'll know. And knowing, even when it cost you the house, turns out to be the thing you were actually building toward.